Total
Like,
crazy. Yeah, it's been a nutty year. Actually, been a nutty 5 years, really, since I began with the Phillies. And
has it been 5 years?
yeah,
What
late
year did you start with the
2017.
Phillies?
Late
17.
2017 was hired. So this time of the year is basically when you go look for different talent or try to bring people from other organizations into your organization. So I was
Yeah.
pulled away from Cleveland then, and Cleveland was coming off a pretty good couple of years. We had been to the World Series. We had a really good 17 where we lost in the first round of the playoffs, but really well established run for a couple of years. And the Phillies were just kind of coming out of this, they call it a rebuild phase, where the team transitions away from like a lot of high paid players and sort of resets who they are. They reinvest a lot of their profits into their minor league system and develop. And so they were ready to kind of jump in back into this playoff caliber team. And that started in 18. So I was hired in the fall of 17. And yeah, it was
And
just
when you
really.
were hired, you came from, if I remember correctly, at the Rays, you were a scout. But prior to that, at the Rays, you were in advanced scouting.
Yeah, so that's right. Like a very similar role that I had in Tampa, and Tampa being like just kind of in the forefront of all the analytical different metrics. And they obviously, employed their major league side to just go after doing things creatively, because they were this small little, almost like a startup company
Right.
in a
I remember
division.
that.
Yeah,
They really ran it like a business. I
they did.
remember talking to you about that.
And they were just Goliaths in that division. Like you're playing against the New York Yankees and the Boston Red Sox and the Toronto Blue Jays, like it's in Baltimore. So that division is just, you can be consumed by the fact that they can spend so much more than you. And here's this club in Tampa that decided that they were going to do things a little differently, and they benefited immensely from sort of going a different way. And now they had these star young players that were highly controllable and going to be there for a while. And they
Hmm.
became a thorn in the side of so many, like I said, Goliaths in the AL East. And
Yeah.
so that sort of like roadmap exists throughout baseball. And it's kind of it's much easier for the smaller market teams like Tampa to do something like that. And then the bigger market teams, they sort of pay for their mistakes in dollars, and that's okay. Like they're capable, when you can sell out 40 plus thousand every night, or you're LA and it's 50,000, or you're the
Right.
Yankees and it's 50,000. It's like, in the sponsorship side, it's like things you just can count on when you're just this huge market. But the smaller markets decided, no, we'll do it a little differently. So I kind of came from that ilk, and then
Right.
went to Cleveland and became more of a traditional scout, where I was not on the field anymore, not in uniform, but I was only scouting professional baseball players, so guys that were signed and they were playing in the minor leagues and then in the big leagues as well. So it was just kind of a different avenue for which I felt like I should learn, and also just how to go out and find different talent that was ready to help your major league club. So that was basically where I had come from right before I went to Philadelphia. And then Philly, getting back into a playoff caliber run, wanted somebody that had been a part of this newer age thought process of strategy on the major league side. And that's why I was hired to rejoin the major league club in Philadelphia. It's been a wild ride.
I mean, you you almost can't write it to follow your whole career. So to back up, so you're from Boston, you come from a city that cares deeply about baseball. You played in the minor leagues for a school that cared deeply about baseball, right? Clemson.
Mm-hmm.
And then you went after Clemson to the minors,
Mm-hmm.
played professionally for how many years?
I was in professional baseball for 4.5 years.
4.5 years. And where did you play as a minor?
So I signed with Cincinnati and played there for 3 seasons, and then was traded to Boston and actually played in the minor leagues for the Red Sox for about a year, which was wild in itself, just because when you're a kid and you grew up, thinking maybe there's a time in which I can play
Right.
in the big leagues. If you could play for the team
Your
that you
home
grew up
team.
watching.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really amazing to
Right.
sort of be a little boy and then all of a sudden you're an
Right.
adult and you're playing.
So from minors, you went to Vanderbilt and you went
Vanderbilt.
to coach.
Yep, I
And
started coaching and obviously in the SEC at Vandy, and Vandy was just beginning to become this powerhouse college baseball program.
from Vanderbilt to the Rays, Rays to the Indians, Indians to the Phillies. I one could say you have touched many, many different parts of the process. And I think that is so interesting because you have such a unique perspective as seeing things through the eyes of the player, seeing things through the eyes of the back office, seeing things through the eyes of the scout, seeing things through the eyes of the coach. Like, talk to me about how all of these different experiences have come together to give you what you were able to contribute, in the last couple of years to the Phillies?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, and a lot of people have asked me this. It's something very similar, and it's like some part of it, of course, is just luck. I feel like I identified very well with Tim Corbin, who's the head coach at Vanderbilt, back when I was a high school player, and he was recruiting me because he was an assistant coach at Clemson.
Hmm.
And look, I come from great parents that supported me, and my dad was an athlete and taught me everything I knew. So when I kind of started this journey, I end up at Clemson, really enjoy my experience there, meet obviously wonderful people and great baseball players, and then kind of wind through the minor leagues. And really, when my professional career, as far as outside of playing, started, I'm back at, I'm sort of reconnected with Tim Corbin at Vandy, and really like that's probably for me. Someone who has just been, somebody that I could learn so much from, in the sense that like he was doing incredible things from, at the time, a university or baseball program in the SEC that was always kind of like, they were sort of a stepping stone for coaches that come and do things there and then move on to the next program. But Corbs taught me a lot, and it allowed me to kind of connect with the Rays, because the Vandy team had great players, and they were, basically being drafted at the top of the first round. So I connected with the Tampa Bay guys. I was able to be hired away from Vanderbilt, and each stop that I went to, and I remember saying this to Andrew Friedman, who's now the president of the Los Angeles Dodgers, and of course at the time he was the general manager, basically the de facto general manager of the Tampa Bay Rays. I said, look, I'm not sure if you understand where I'm at, but like I don't want to work for any of the other 29 teams. Like I look at what you're doing here, and I want to be a part of this and this process and learn from you. And so I was just fortunate that places I've been kind of led me to my next occupation, and that was the same when I sort of looked at the role with the Indians. A former player at Vandy, who's now the general manager of the Cubs, but a former player in Carter Hawkins at Vanderbilt, was hired by the Indians right out of school. And of course, had a relationship with Carter. And Carter, years later, said, hey, do you want to come do this scouting role for us? We'd love to have you a part of the group. I think it's great. Next step for you. And so, sure, let's go. And I move on to a role that, benefited from me from growing in the game, but also at the time, I mean, my wife and I, Kira and I started having kids, and I was able to be home a lot more. And it was kind of the right place for me in baseball. We stayed in Tampa, and Tampa's been great to us. But yeah, like each little step along the way, I've met these people that have been able to teach me something new. And then when I got over to the Phillies, it was like, let's give all this knowledge back and
Hmm.
reboot a program here that can help the Phillies advance to the playoffs, something they hadn't done in several years. And as of this season, it was 11 years. So it had been a very long time. And the city was thirsty for it. The ownership group was, of course, thirsty for it. The players and coaches, were
Hmm.
definitely ready to do this. And it was definitely a tribulating season, in a sense. Like it's not often that you you move away from one manager and move into the next manager, and you do very well. I think in the
in that
history of
first
this
season.
happening, yeah, it just hasn't turned out well. I think of all the times it's happened in season, only a few times has the team ever made the playoffs. And so there we were, kind of at the cusp of making the playoffs. We get in, and the players just went crazy and just kept going.
So tell me about that moment. So prior to being the bench coach, your title was, remind me again,
Quality assurance. Yeah.
quality
So
assurance, which is advanced scouting.
that's right.
And you got into this at a time where, again, you did a role in this similar capacity for the Rays. And that was right when Moneyball came out, right? So
Mm-hmm.
it was when the world first at large became aware that this thing was happening and changing in baseball. And so do you feel that I mean, you're one of not that many people who have seen the inside of the way advanced scouting works. Like, how has that affected your experience and your perspective on things?
Yeah. Moneyball definitely broadened the perspective of how you could look at one problem and maybe attack it differently than how it had been attacked for a century. And so, I was just able to grasp why Tampa was able to and wanted to do this in a market that they were, specifically trying to. Not every team now, all 30 have a version of this. So it's widely used. But basically what it comes down to is every team has their own specific set of metrics
Hmm.
in which they analyze the game from. And they in some way they're looking at everything as a particular asset. Or if you're looking at game strategy, in which I focus on, it's you're looking at the game in a way in which you could probably in most cases put the chips in your favor a little bit. So as we look at a club that we're about to play, we're trying to tell our players this is what's going to happen, because there are trends. There are, if you look at large samples of data, you can start to see why things happen the way they do. So, in some regards, you're able to put your players on the field in a certain position so that they can maybe catch more fly balls or be in position to field more ground balls. Same thing when it comes to your offense. Like, you can tell them exactly what the shape of the pitch is going to look like that they might see that night, so they're better prepared to practice that. And in general, you're just trying to impart a different process that was in place for so long. And look, there's so much of the traditional part of the game that still exists and is necessary.
Yeah.
You still have human beings playing the game, and
Right.
that's amazing. And so in any chance that you could say, like, hey, we have this great strategy and it's not going to work on the human side, of course you default to the human side. Like, you still want them to feel good and be comfortable doing what they do. And if you don't have that, if you're not going to, wrap your arm around somebody and tell them, like, look, we're going to do this because this makes you feel good. If they tell you, like, I can't do my job when I'm under these circumstances that you guys are potentially putting us into, and well, of course we back way off and say, okay, what do we do here? How do we do this? And do it most effectively. And so there is an ebb and flow to this thing. And it's not all like, hey, we're either going to do it this way and we'll win, or we can't and we'll
Mhm.
lose. We don't really know how it all affects, so sort of the symbiotic nature of playing the game.
But you've lived through a generation where I guess there was the old school and then the new school, and being on the forefront of that and convincing people of its efficacy. And like you said, balancing that human psychology element with the math and the statistics that go behind it, right? So must be really interesting to have seen that evolution and um, sort of bring it to the forefront.
Yeah, it has been amazing. And yeah, like, I obviously I applaud, just the people, and like, looking back at the Tampa guys and what they do. And there's still most of them here that we live in Tampa are some of my best friends to date, and like,
Mhm.
it's really a balancing act. I mean, honestly, it's you could know as much about a guy mathematically as you'd ever want to know.
But they're still
Um,
humans.
but they are still humans, and it comes down to their how they feel and what they feel
Mhm.
like and how they are interacting with each other. And there's
Mhm.
so many things that are unmeasurable.
Mhm.
And really that's the art of it all. I think that's why in most places you have things that work and things that don't work. I mean, by and large, the data sets are available to everybody. They're both public and private. Of
Yeah.
course, every company, every team has their individual internal metrics and how they look at different things. But generally speaking, like if you wanted to just do a ton of research, there's so much research publicly available over the last 20 years of
Mhm.
games. I mean, we're
Mhm.
talking massive amounts of data.
Right.
And this data that's collected, I mean, it would blow your mind. The camera systems in
Yeah.
ballparks track every movement.
Yeah.
It's unreal.
And then the amount of effort that has to go into then tabulate all of those
Oh
camera
yeah,
angles and all of that. I mean, it's crazy. A
it is
football
not.
field's worth of data, right?
Yes, it's just like gigabytes and terabytes on a daily
Mhm.
basis.
Mhm. Mhm. And so you went from running that division for the Phillies. And when that became your job 5 years ago, how entrenched in that world was the Phillies? I know when you joined the Rays, it was very new to Major League Baseball in general. Not every team had advanced scouting. When you came to the Phillies, was it a big part of the team or was it growing at the time?
Yeah, and that was, I mean, it was growing. So obviously, the main reason for my hiring was that I was someone that had done this before
Yeah.
in a different place that was pretty desirable. So I came with a roadmap, albeit it had changed because I had left that area of work
For
for
a while. Yeah.
5 years. Yeah, but that said, the Phillies being this up and coming team, they didn't necessarily pour a lot of resources into this up until 17 when I was
Mhm.
hired in this time of year. And so really in 18 we were able to give a lot of strategy that was not firsthand for the staff before 18. We were able to provide them with an enormous amount of strategy going into each and every series. And so at that point we had a new staff in place in Philadelphia, and yeah, we just hit the ground running and tried furiously to give ourselves any marginal benefit that we could to help us win games.
And so flash forward 5 years to this past August, you're offered this promotion, from advanced scouting to the bench coach. And why do you think Rob chose you? What do you think what the method was there? What kind of value do you think you're bringing in that had you making this big jump in this momentous year where they've already, like you said, done this, you know, this firing of the general manager right before the beginning of the season? How did you factor into the equation?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just trust. And Rob and I both came on board in late 17. And the first time we had spent some time on the phone leading into spring training, and then we quickly um, thought very highly of each other. And at that point, like I had observed him work through spring training and just saw this tireless work ethic. I saw this man who had worn so many different hats in baseball throughout player development and the major leagues. He comes from the Yankees, but more than anything, we just developed this really unique friendship built around trust. And so because I trusted him so much and he trusted me, I had always asked him over the last few seasons, even going back to 18, like, hey, do you mind if I just watch how you work and what you do? I think one day it might benefit me to know how you run a major league spring training camp,
Hmm.
and just generally his day to day.
Yeah.
And so that was how it all began. And I think when he was promoted to this role, albeit under these circumstances that weren't really great. Like, I mean, Joe Girardi's a great human being. He's a great man, and things weren't working very well. And here's a man just below him and Rob Thompson, who had been with him with the Yankees. I mean, there's a long friendship there. And so in one regard, they're maybe ushering Joe Girardi out the door because things aren't great. And
Hmm.
they're giving this opportunity to Rob. And I think at the time too, Rob was he was a little disheartened by the circumstances, but knew that we could maybe do a few things a little bit differently and just impart some sort of emotional security and also just steadiness throughout the club that might benefit this group. I
Mhm.
mean, mind you, we have a huge payroll. Like, we have talented players. Like, the
Yeah.
owner, John Middleton, has spent a lot of money on this club, and he's
Mhm.
thinking this team should be able to make the playoffs. Like, this is almost absurd that we're not playing very well. And so I think when Rob had the opportunity to promote somebody to his role, there were two factors at play there. There was one, here's here's Cal, as they refer to me as, like, in his mind, he's the guy that studied everything I've done for the last 5 years, and I
Mhm.
trust him a whole bunch.
Mhm.
And then there's other deserving coaches that have been doing their roles that could quite easily step into the role, but I'm not sure he thought that they would do the role as well as somebody like myself who had been observing him do the role for so long. And so, you know, I mean, what can I say? He called later that day when things went awry and said, "You're going to move to the bench role." And so it was a massive step for me. Um, and, I think, I mean, looking back, it was something that in the moment you're like, oh my God, like, my role's changing completely. And I have this whole other role that somebody still needs to do. So for a long time there, I kind of wore a couple of hats, but
Mhm.
my group really pulled the chain in the same direction, and we just kind of knew what we had to do every day and just got it done.
Mhm.
And the team did steady. The ship steadied. They started playing well right away.
Right.
And so, God, we just took off. I mean, it was like the most enjoyable thing ever, because you're working all of these hours and then you see this fruit of your labor turn into wins every night. And it's pretty exciting.
Tell me about how, as the season progressed and things started to heat up, like what it was it like behind the scenes in terms of like morale, and what did you see change amongst the team?
Yeah, I mean, I think winning right away after the change was probably the greatest morale booster you could ever impart on the club. Like, as coaches, you just kind of work through the process that you think is going to help the
Mhm.
club win that
Yeah.
night. And then when the lights come on and the game starts, like, all the
Mhm.
work is done. You just
Right.
cheer them on, you keep them going. You coach them up and make sure that they know, like, that it's okay to fail in the moment, keep going, keep doing your thing. And so I think winning right away was obviously the biggest component of getting that morale and the players feeling like they were better than they had
Right.
played. They had already known that, so it wasn't surprising for us, but they played so well that it was kind of a shock to the system. All of a
Mhm.
sudden, within 1 month, we set some record. Like, it's very difficult to win 20 games a month. And we came close. I think we won 19 or 20 that first month that we were kind of going in June. And it was like, oh my God, like, this team was below 500 by 7 or so games. And now they're cruising over 500 and look like
Mhm.
they're making a move. And we just kept that momentum up. Like, we played above average baseball in July and August, and we skidded a little bit in September. The club was tired. We were battling some health concerns with some of our players,
Mhm.
and that's always the most alarming thing when guys start to check up. They're breaking
Mhm.
down physically a little bit.
It's a
Um,
lot.
it's a lot. Like, they're battling and they're trying, but their body's starting to fail, and so we had to kind of make sure that those guys weren't going to damage themselves. And so a few of them had to go on what we call the injured list, and that's 15 days for pitchers and 10
Right.
days. So you could lose one of your best guys for half a month like that.
Right.
And that, allowed us to, I think, only win 13 or 14 games in September, which barely got us in, but we got in.
Got
And
it.
once you
Squeaked in.
get in, there's 12 teams that get in, and every one of those 12 teams is it's frustrating in a sense that, like, if you're the hottest team at that point, which we
Mhm.
had kind of sparked that engine getting in, um, you're scary. It's frustrating for another team because they played better than you for 6 months, and now all of a sudden you're this team that everything is working out for, and you just go on and beat it a lot of teams. And It's really the hottest team, the healthiest and hottest team typically plays really well in the playoffs.
Hmm. Right. So it's a big change.
Yeah.
So you've been a part of so many different teams and so many different locker rooms. Holistically, like how does the 2022 Phillies team as a spirit compare? Or like how is it different than all the other teams you've been a part of? What's the special sauce?
I mean, that's a great question. I've seen some really cool things. Like I was a part of a college team that played in the College World Series, and that was super fun. And there's always a text thread of my friends that I play with and teammates in college. They were asking the same question, like, why didn't we do some of this or
Right.
party like this when we were in college? And
Right.
it's hilarious, but I mean, nothing really takes the cake like, the major leagues. And here
Right.
you are playing in the World Series. Like it becomes a media circus. Like you walk out of a dugout, onto the field. You have this easy pathway on this massive field. And then all of a sudden during the World Series, Ange, it's like 10 reporters deep all the way foul line to foul line, everywhere you look. There's hundreds of cameras set up. There's stages set up for, different networks to
Right.
broadcast. It's just nuts.
Right. Right. Yeah. So and they were prepared. They were prepared to handle all of that. That's a lot to handle in something that's already incredibly stressful.
Yeah. And we had a couple of guys that had played in the World Series. So they were great resources for other players. We had staff members who had been a part of World Series runs. So
Mhm.
we were probably as prepared as we could be. It just hadn't happened in almost over 10
Yeah.
years in Philadelphia.
Yeah. It's the kind of thing where if you have enough people around that have been through it, there's someone to help shepherd you through. You can't really read a handbook, I suppose.
Yeah, you just have to experience it.
Um so as you look to the off season, like how first of all, is everybody taking a break? Is everybody just getting ready? Like how are everybody's morale? Obviously, lost in the end the World Series, but I mean everyone has to be pretty damn proud of themselves for this year, right?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think when you step back and you kind of look at how it all unfolded, people are, you know, slightly disappointed that, we couldn't pull off a couple of wins the last few games of the season. But that said, it's yeah, you just cannot ever replace what it's like to play in the World Series. I mean, there's so many different players and people that have careers like maybe myself or other staff members that are in the game for 20, 30, 40 years. And whatever the reason is, their organization never makes it to the World Series. So
Right.
it's such an amazing moment for the whole group. I mean, and I look at it's like such a group effort. Yes, it's the major league team that's doing this, but we have a minor league system and minor league system full of coaches and hitting coaches and pitching coaches and managers and staff members and trainers. I mean, that's just the baseball operations department. And that doesn't
Right.
include like everybody that sells tickets or works on the PR departments or anywhere else on the business side. It's just a massive undertaking. And so you get to this pinnacle of your season and everybody's just in this massive celebration mode. It's so fun to see. Everybody is just all their fruit of their labor, all of their effort is just culminated into this. Let's just party for a whole week or 10 days. So yeah,
And
it's great
beyond
for
that, the whole city really. It's not just who's
yeah,
on the payroll, it's the whole
right.
city.
Yeah, the whole city just goes crazy. So
I
yeah,
was
it's
in an
super fun.
Uber. I was in an Uber last night and he was like, selfishly, as much as I wanted the Phillies to win, I think that if we won, we would have burned down the city. So at least we got all the revenue, but we didn't burn down the city. I was like, that's
This
very
is true.
practical of you.
We thought, I mean, it started to get, you start to see some of the t-shirts being made. There's like the grease the poles
Uh-huh.
anecdotal t-shirt. And I'm
Right.
just like, every time you see a new t-shirt, you're just laughing. The
Yeah.
players are too. It's
Yeah.
pretty cool.
And you like you said, you grew up in Boston, so you grew up in a city not dissimilar in terms of passion for baseball, but like tell me about how that compares to like what's it like to be amongst Philly sports fans?
Yeah. Well, you're right. Boston. And Boston has seen a lot of winning over the
Right.
last couple of decades. And so, yes, I mean, growing up, I had my share of heartache as a Boston fan. Um, but that said, like, you can't really compare. I mean, we as staff members have all said the same thing, and as players too. Um, Many of us have been to different events, even if it's the World Series, and even when we went to Houston, um, it just wasn't the same. Like the Phillies fans are just they're it's like the 10th player. They're just consuming all the oxygen in the other team's dugout.
Feeding you guys really
Oh,
energistically.
it's incredible. Yeah, and then the players had hoped that that's what it was like because they were told like, "Hey,
Hmm.
we play this game at home. If we get to a home playoff game, you'll see something you haven't seen yet." And you know, they were right. Like it was just unbelievable when we opened at home in the division series versus the Braves. It was just and all of a sudden, like, I mean, in a sense, it was comical because they were mocking the Braves at times, throwing their own chant right in their face when they were losing games, and overly supportive of us in the form of just, a massive amount of like
Yeah.
hearing loss, I guess. I mean, it's just the volume was just incredible. So yeah,
Philly
they
fans are famous, right? Being on this side of it now, is it different than what you perceived it to be before you became a part of a Phillies team?
I think so. I think so. I think we all still know, like, if we're still talking about the Phillies fans, it's like a rough group. It definitely they'll let you know, like if you're not doing well, if you're catching a lot of losses, like you get booed at home. I mean, that's
Hmm.
not typical in any other stadium, I would say. But
Right.
this group is like you either get it done or you're just second class citizens. So
Right.
it's
All or
okay. I
nothing.
think I think everybody expects that, and they knew that was going to happen. It was difficult for some, and now that they're perceived as a winning group, it's probably even more special for them, and they'll know how to handle it even better in the future.
So perceived as a winning group. Okay. So going into next year, obviously that puts a lot of pressure on. Obviously you have to take a minute to just recharge, let these guys' bodies get better. But how are you going to manage those expectations going into next year? And, how does that, like, do you keep things up through the year, through the winter? Do you start fresh in the spring? Like, what's the mentality in the off season?
Yeah, well, everybody is probably just kind of deloading and decompressing here for the next couple of weeks, and then we'll start trying to communicate with the guys. Like some of our medical staff will reach out to guys that,
Hmm.
or most everybody, like our medical staff does such a great job at making sure that they're keeping tabs on players, and the staff will as well. We'll just kind of start communicating with some of the players and just checking on them,
Hmm.
hoping they're well and what they're anticipating. It's such a short off season. The
Right.
regular season started late, and now we ended late, and we played to the end. So I think as of just a couple of days ago, we were at 100 days away from spring training, and that
Wow.
feels weird. Like I hadn't left Philly yet, and people were like 100 days, and we report, and it's like, wait a minute,
Wow. What?
but it's
Yeah.
true. Like February is going to be here quickly.
Yeah. It's a
Um,
short break.
it's a short one, but that said, like, yeah, you just hope also that like what they experienced and how they played the last few weeks is something that they'll have as experience going into next season.
Motivation to tap into.
Yeah, and they'll understand why they won and what mechanisms they put in place to keep the winning going.
Hmm.
And even though the season's like a business cycle and it'll go up and down, they'll still have all this experience to fall back on. And I think that's what makes teams go on a bit of a run. You get a core group of players that get this kind of really amazing taste in their mouth, and they want to replicate that every
Hmm.
year.
Hmm.
And it really doesn't matter the level. I remember as a freshman in college, the Clemson guys had gone to back college World Series. And the guys that were still there were like, wait till you guys get a taste of this. Like, that's
Telling
what
the
we got to
lore,
do.
the stories. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's pretty fascinating, you know, and we got some great leadership and
Yeah.
really good players. And I think, you know, sky's the limit for whatever they want to do as long as they're healthy.
Hearing your story, I mean, I've heard your story before, but hearing it again and just the thing that sticks out to me is that you as a leader and as a professional have really put learning at the center of who you are. You repeatedly explained to me that you wanted to put yourself in positions where you could learn from people, absorb from people, that you could take, broaden your experience and broaden your knowledge up for the game as a whole. Is that learned? Like, do you think that you can teach someone to have that type of outlook? And if so, how do you teach the players to have that learning mentality?
I think, you know, honestly, like I was always a good player, but I really like to practice. So I think that any skill that's developed, you just do a lot of it and you do it.
10,000 hours, right?
Yeah, you do it repetitively. And so, you know, like this saying that you've heard over the last few centuries, like you can do anything you want to do. Like people that do anything they want to do, they just try to do it for a long time
Right.
and then they end up there. And so it's not that they say like you can become the president of the United States and then they close their eyes and they're the president of the United States. Like you never really anticipate unless you research that person how much they actually did to get to where they are. So I would think that that's probably the biggest lesson is that if you just want to do something and you practice, you are of course going to fall down, but you have to get back up and keep doing
Mhm.
it and doing it and doing it. And you recognize people that are around you. I think when you're doing something so repetitively, you're like,
Right.
oh my God, that person figured that out. That I need to talk to them. I need to learn from them. And so you're constantly kind of looking around like, who's getting this done and how are they doing it and why are they doing it so well? And so you start asking better questions and that leads you to, you know, a better process. And next thing you know, it's a decade later and you're doing it yourself.
I think it's certainly the right mentality for someone who's going to be a leader in a position like this, because it's tone at the top. It's reminding people that they should never stop learning. There's never you never don't have will always have opportunity to gain more experience, gain more knowledge, and create those experiences for yourself.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome.